Have you ever, like, I don't know, stopped to think about how crazy it is that the thing we use every day, money, has this, like, incredibly long and interesting history?
It is wild when you really dig into it.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing today, a deep dive, just for you, into the whole evolution of money. From those, simple swaps way back when to the digital stuff we use now. No boring textbooks, I promise.
Right. We're going for, clarity and structure, but keeping it fun. And for the listener who's all about getting to the good stuff, we've looked at like a ton of sources. We have articles, we have transcripts of documentaries, YouTube, PBS, all sorts of stuff. Really interesting stuff.
All about understanding the big shifts, the
Hmm.
tech, the society stuff that shaped how we exchange, well, value. And trust me, there's some really surprising stuff in here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so way back when, before we had actual currency, it was all about bartering, right?
Exactly. Barter, that's the foundation. It's just straight up, trading goods and services, like one for the other. The PBS transcript has this example of a Mesopotamian farmer, right? His wheat harvest wasn't great, so he needed wool.
Okay, so what did he do?
Well, his neighbor, Inkashish, he needed some help with something, so they worked out a deal. Wool for a favor down the line. Simple. Right. They each got what they needed directly.
I can already see how this could get tricky.
Oh, yeah. As soon as you have more people, more stuff, more needs, it gets complicated fast. You run into what's called the double coincidence of wants. Basically, both people in the trade have to need what the other has at the same time. It's explained in the YouTube transcript really well. Think about a blacksmith who needs grain, but the farmer doesn't need any tools right then. No trade.
So frustrating.
And then there's the whole divisibility problem. Like, how do you trade a cow for a small amount of grain? You can't exactly chop it up. The YouTube transcript mentions that. It's like, okay, I need a handful of barley, but all I have is this whole cow.
Right, what do you do? It becomes very messy.
Exactly. But even with those issues, bartering, it worked for a long time. It's the basis of all trade. It's like the first draft.
So, from awkward bartering, we eventually get to something a bit more, well, organized. Commodity money.
Yeah, so around 3000 BCE, we start seeing this shift. It's when items with their own value, inherent value, start being used as a kind of currency. And there's some great examples of this in the YouTube transcript. Different cultures use different things, obviously, but the principle is the same.
So, like what? What were they actually using? Paint a picture for us.
Okay, so livestock. Cattle especially, they were super valuable for obvious reasons, right? Food, clothing, labor. So in many societies, cattle became a kind of currency. Then you have grain, of course.
Right.
The transcript mentions barley being used in Mesopotamia. It's essential, so it has value. Makes sense. And then get this, shells.
Shells, really?
Yeah, cowrie shells were used as currency in parts of Africa, the Pacific Islands, all over. For a long time, actually, they were kind of rare, pretty to look at, so they had value.
So instead of hoping your neighbor needs your extra pottery when you need fish, you can trade for something universally wanted, like a cow or some barley. Seems a lot more efficient.
Way more efficient. Trade started flowing better, but there were still issues. The YouTube transcript talks about this. Imagine that metal worker we mentioned earlier. He has some extra tools, wants to buy a whole herd of cattle. Transporting those cows, feeding them, protecting them, all that is hard, especially over long distances. Commodity money was an improvement, but it wasn't perfect.
Okay, so now we get to what I think is a real turning point. Coins. Standardized, portable, metal. Genius.
Yeah, it was a huge step forward. And we can pinpoint it too. Around 600 BCE in the Kingdom of Lydia, the YouTube transcript highlights this. Modern day Turkey, by the way. They were the first to make standardized coins, and we're talking specifically crafted coins here, not just random chunks of metal.
So what were they made of?
Electrum. It's a natural mix of gold and silver, but here's the key. They standardized the size and weight, so no more guessing about purity, about how much it's worth.
Standardization. That's huge, right?
Yeah.
Need more arguing about whether that lump of silver is really worth what they're saying.
Exactly. Trade gets so much easier, more reliable. The YouTube transcript talks about the other advantages too. Portability, for one. Coins are way easier to carry around than a cow, right? And durability. Unlike grain, for instance, coins don't go bad, they last.
And then, of course, the Greeks and Romans, they jumped on this idea, right? All those coins with emperors' faces on them.
Oh yeah, they loved it. And this is where we see a new layer added to money. Symbolic value. The YouTube transcript touches on this. The stamp of authority, the emperor's face. It wasn't just about guaranteeing the metal. It was about power, trust. Money started to become more than just a commodity. It was a political tool as well.
So we've gone from direct swaps to valuable commodities to coins. But carrying around lots of coins, especially for big transactions, still seems like a hassle, right?
Yeah.
Especially for merchants traveling far. This is where paper money comes in. What a change that must have been.
Totally revolutionary. Both the YouTube transcript and the MRHB network excerpt point to China as the birthplace of paper money, specifically during the Tang dynasty. It became really widespread during the Song dynasty that followed. Imagine how much lighter and more convenient that must have been.
Okay, but how did that even work back then? It's just paper. What made it valuable?
Well, at first it wasn't just paper. Think of them as like promissory notes. This is explained in both the YouTube transcript and the MRHB network. It was essentially a promise backed by the government that you could exchange this paper for a certain amount of precious metal, silver or gold usually.
So like a receipt that says, this paper is good for this much gold.
Yeah, exactly. The MRHB network details how merchants would deposit their coins at these government shops and get these notes in return, so it was still tied to something real, which was reassuring, right?
Makes sense. So the YouTube transcript mentions that this whole thing was inspired by the problem of lugging heavy coins around. Suddenly, long-distance trade becomes way easier.
Oh, yeah. And this is where the concept of fiat money comes in. The YouTube transcript touches on this too. Fiat currency, its value isn't tied to a physical commodity anymore. It's all about government decree. They say it's legal tender, and people trust that. It's a pretty big shift.
So that's happening in China. But Europe was a bit slower to adopt paper money, right?
Yeah, you're right. Both the TechCrunch article and the History of Money Part 1 mention that. Guys like Marco Polo brought the idea back from China in the 13th century, but it took a while for it to catch on in Europe, a few hundred years actually. The TechCrunch article says Sweden was one of the early adopters.
Interesting. And the History of Money Part 1 points out that before proper banknotes, money traders were already using promissory notes in medieval Italy and Flanders. I guess it was a way to avoid the risks of carrying tons of coins.
Makes sense. Those promissory notes were like stepping stones to the paper money we use today.
So paper money makes things a lot easier. But how do we get to a more stable, like international system? This is where we get to the gold standard, right?
Yep, the gold standard. It really took off in the 19th century. The YouTube transcript, TechZim, and from barter to digital currencies all talk about this. Basically, countries agreed to fix the value of their money to a certain amount of gold. TechZim says the UK adopted it in 1821. It was all about creating predictability in international finance.
So it's like your paper money had this solid backing. You knew it could be exchanged for actual gold. That must have been pretty reassuring.
It was. Stability was the big advantage here. The YouTube transcript points that out. The value of your money wasn't just floating around. It was tied to something real, something scarce. It also boosted international trust. Other countries knew your currency was good because they could trade it for gold.
But there are downsides too, right? What were the big limitations of the gold standard?
Well, the big one, as the YouTube transcript mentions, was that it restricted how much money governments could print. They had to have enough gold to back it all up.
Wow, that makes sense.
And that becomes a problem during, wars, economic crises. Governments often need to spend more in those situations, but the gold standard held them back. It was too rigid.
Which ultimately led to its demise, right?
Yeah.
So what happened? How did the gold standard end?
It was a gradual process. The YouTube transcript and TechSim both talk about this. World War I was a big factor. Countries needed money for the war, so they started suspending the gold standard. Then you have the Great Depression in the 1930s, more pressure on the system. But the final blow, as both sources mention, came in 1971. President Nixon, he ended the direct link between the US dollar and gold. And since the dollar was so important globally, that was basically the end of the gold standard for everyone. Fiat currency became the norm.
So now the value of our money is really based on trust in the government. A pretty big change in how we view value, wouldn't you say?
Huge. And this fiat system is still what we use today. But the story doesn't end there, of course. Late 20th century, early 21st century, we get another massive shift, digital payments.
Right. Credit cards, debit cards, online banking, the whole thing. The YouTube transcript from barter to digital currencies and the evolution of money, they all talk about this revolution in how we pay for things.
It's changed everything. Now money can move around without any physical cash changing hands. And the scale of this is mind-blowing. The PBS transcript says that in 2018 alone, almost 370 billion transactions were processed by payment networks. That's incredible. For you, this means speed, convenience. It's changed the whole game.
Especially for global trade, right? The PBS transcript also talks about how even the telegraph back in the 19th century was a precursor to this. Money was starting to move faster than people thanks to things like Western Union. The RMA excerpt mentions their wire transfer system, too, launched in 1872. It really changed things.
It was a major innovation. And let's not forget credit cards. The TechCrunch article reminds us about the Diners Club card, which was the first one, back in 1950. The story is kind of funny, actually. This guy, he kept finding himself without enough cash at restaurants.
It's amazing how often great ideas come from simple problems. So we've gone from physical money to digital representations of value, but now we have another layer, cryptocurrencies. For many, it's still a bit of a mystery.
Yeah, it's pretty new. Bitcoin, created in 2009 by Satoshi Nakamoto, that was the first decentralized cryptocurrency. It's outlined in the YouTube transcript, Booty Finance, MRHB Network, How Does Bitcoin Work? They all mention it. It's a completely different way of thinking about digital money.
Decentralized, right? That's the key word. But what does it actually mean?
So unlike regular currencies, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin aren't controlled by a central bank or a government. The MRHB network explains this really well. Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator, he wanted to cut out those traditional intermediaries, the banks that often charge fees and slow things down, especially for international transactions.
Okay, so no more middleman. And the tech behind this is blockchain, right?
Exactly. The YouTube transcript, Booty Finance, MRHB Network, they all emphasize this. Imagine a shared digital ledger. It records all the transactions, and it's spread across a huge network of computers. This makes it very transparent and very secure, because if anyone tries to mess with the ledger, everyone else on the network can see it.
So it's like a public record that everyone can check. And what about those complex math problems computers solve? That's Bitcoin mining, right?
Exactly. How does Bitcoin work explains this really well. Mining is basically using specialized computers to solve these really tough cryptographic puzzles. It's how new Bitcoins are created and given to the miners as a reward. It also helps validate new transactions and add them to the blockchain. And there's this thing called halving, which happens every 4 years or so. It reduces the reward for mining new blocks. It's all about controlling the supply of Bitcoin.
So you need a special wallet to keep your Bitcoin safe, right?
Yeah. How does Bitcoin work? And the American Journal of Public Diplomacy and International Studies both talk about the different types of wallets. You have custodial wallets, where your private keys are held by a third party. It's like having someone else manage your account. It's easier for beginners, but you don't have as much control.
And then there's
Non-custodial wallets, those give you total control over your private keys. You usually have a software app on your phone or a physical device like a little hardware wallet. Those are better for security.
Okay, so you have more control, but also more responsibility with those.
Right. And there's hot storage and cold storage to think about. Hot storage is online, so it's more vulnerable to hackers. Cold storage is offline, much more secure. That American Journal article even shows pictures of these hardware wallets like Trezor and Ledger. They're becoming pretty popular for cold storage.
It all seems very innovative, but as both Booty Finance and that American Journal article mention, the price of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies can be, well, a bit crazy. It's a volatile market, right?
It is. It's all driven by supply and demand, and it can change fast. That journal article actually calls cryptocurrencies speculative assets because the price is so unpredictable.
So looking ahead, where do we go from here? What's the future of money?
Well, the YouTube transcript, Booty Finance, and From Barter to Digital Currencies all suggest that things are going to keep changing. We have all these different digital currencies popping up. Governments are looking into their own digital currencies too, what they call central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. And then there's AI, artificial intelligence. It's going to play a huge role in finance, that's for sure. Booty Finance even mentions biometric payments. Imagine paying with your fingerprint or your face. Convenient, but there are privacy issues to think about there.
It really is an amazing story when you think about it. From bartering to these incredibly complex digital systems.
I know, it's incredible. And as both the YouTube transcript and that American Journal article point out, every big change in money have been driven by economic needs and by technological progress. It's like each step builds on the one before it.
And it's not just about economics either. The YouTube transcript makes a great point. The history of money is also about how societies evolve, how trust develops, how we constantly find new ways to do things with technology. It's fascinating. So next time you pay for something, think about that whole journey from those simple swaps to what we have now. It makes you wonder, right, how will tech shape money in the future? What's the next big revolution going to be? And how will it affect you? Thanks for diving into this with us.